So where would you expect to meet with the risen Jesus? Here? In a church service? Maybe in your personal prayer time? Maybe at a conference, a Christian conference perhaps that you go to? Walking through a beautiful countryside perhaps? Well, in our story this morning, Jesus meets his disciples in a way quite an unexpected place, but on the other hand, one where they were often to be found. But it was unexpected to them rather than unexpected to Jesus. And so unexpected that, like we've seen in lots of the stories of Jesus meeting his friends after the resurrection, these friends, his disciples, who he'd known for years, just didn't recognize him. And it was only when he told them where to fish and when they caught this huge net full that John was the first to recognize who he was. We've heard where, some of the people in the church are going to expected to be this time tomorrow. So just imagine Jesus showing up maybe at your desk at work or in the shops, if that's where you are, in your workplace, or after you've done the hoovering and you're having your coffee. Would you recognize him? Back in Isaiah chapter 65, the first of our readings, the prophet painted a picture of the new heavens and new earth that God was going to recreate at the end of time. And the picture is not one of kind of clouds and angels playing harps. It's not maybe the endless church services some of us have in our heads. He says, they will build houses and they will dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and they will eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant things and others eat. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain. So you're not going to sit down and do nothing. You've still got some work to do when you get up there. God will not do away with work. What he will do is he'll get rid of futile work. How often have we been to work and think, well, this is a complete waste of time doing this? Well, that won't be happening. He'll get rid of futile work, he'll get rid of unjust work, he'll get rid of vain work. And the promise of eternity is a heavenly city on earth where we enjoy all of God's good gifts, including food, houses, satisfying, enjoyable work. So does that vision change how you now view your work as it is these days? Because Jesus wants to come alongside us, even when things are frustrating and difficult. He wants to breathe life into our work, breathe some of those qualities of resurrection into what we're doing right now. And when we work with Jesus, we can bring abundant results. But you know what they say about work, and particularly what they say about all work and no play. Being a workaholic is not good for us. It's not good for either our physical or our mental health, because we need to rest and relax, and we need to socialize with friends. I was reading the other day about some research that showed that those people, particularly older people, who no longer go to work, those who socialized a lot before, the ones who continue to socialize a lot were healthier and they lived longer than those who didn't. So you know what to do now. Keep on socializing. And we know from experience, don't we, from during the various lockdowns that we've endured, that depression levels increase when we can't go out and socialize and mix with our friends. Jesus always enjoyed meeting people. He enjoyed socializing with them. And if this involves some food and wine, then so much the better. And I'm certainly with him there. I mean, if you look about it, his first miracle was to turn water into wine. And a very good wine it was at the wedding in Cana. I think we can assume that there was also good food and a good party atmosphere at that occasion as well. He ate a great feast at the house of Levi the publican, as well as eating with Simon the Pharisee when his feet were anointed with expensive perfume. He ate with 4,000 or 5,000 people when he fed them with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he enjoyed the company of Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. And of course, on a more somber occasion, he shared bread and wine with his disciples at the Last Supper. And the passage that we've just heard from John's Gospel tells of something that took place after Jesus' resurrection. And in this, he talks about good days and bad days, or at least he takes his disciples through good days and bad days. Because in this story, Jesus literally turns up at Peter's and the other disciples' workplace. They were fishermen. So on the shore near to where they were fishing is basically what we might consider to be their workplace. And he turns up on a day when Peter is feeling a failure. Because the very thing Peter thought that he could do, which was to be a fisherman, is a thing that he's drawing a blank at. No fish. Out there all night and not even a nibble. But notice Jesus doesn't rebuke Peter and the disciples for returning to fishing. In fact, he encourages them and he helps them. Because work, it turns out, is good. Work is part of the resurrection life that Jesus has risen again to bring us. He doesn't call us to stop work and just be spiritual for the rest of our lives and on into eternity. He comes alongside us in our work and he breathes his life into it. I guess, though, we all have good days and bad days, whether we're still working or whether we're retired. And the story begins with a bad day for the disciples out there fishing because it wasn't yet breakfast time and they'd not caught a thing to eat. And the disciples were clearly at a loose end. They didn't know what to do with themselves after the death and the resurrection of Jesus. So Peter said, "I'm going out fishing." And some of the others decided that they would go along with him as well. Now, we've all had those times in our lives when there's been such upheaval that you just long for a bit of normality. I'm sure we've all felt like that at various times through the pandemic. Maybe there were times when you still do feel like that there's such upheaval in your lives that you just want things to go back to normal. To the disciples, or at least to those who were fishermen, going out fishing on Lake Galilee represented a bit of normality. Unfortunately, as we've seen, they were out there all night and caught nothing. They were tired and they were hungry. The sun was rising and they were heading back to shore when they saw this man on the beach. "Good morning," he shouted out to them. "So did you catch anything for breakfast?" The answer, of course, was no. And the man went on and he said, "Well, try throwing your net over the other side of the boat and see what happens." Now you have to remember that they hadn't recognized Jesus. So here was this apparent stranger telling them how to do their job. Yet there must have been something about him that made them obey, because they did what he said. They threw their nets over the other side of the boat and they caught loads of fish. 153 to be precise. 153 fish is a huge catch, far more than they needed, far more than they expected. And it was then that they realized exactly who it was on the shore. So they hauled their catch on board and they headed back to where Jesus was, on the beach. And by the time they arrived, Jesus had got a nice little fire going, and he was able to cook them breakfast on the beach. Probably the best barbecue of them all. Now, I know I've told one or two people this before, but I remember a few years ago doing some work with a company in Volos, which is a small coastal town in Greece. And one evening they took me to this little restaurant up a back street in Volos. And it was packed with the locals, and the tables were rough wood. There were plates of chunks of bread, jugs of wine, and the fish just kept coming and coming. I'm not sure we had as many as 153, but there was a lot of fish nevertheless. And I always felt that this was the closest I'd come to having the kind of meal that John talks about in that passage. Really though, this story is not about food, and it's not even all about work. It's largely about love and forgiveness. Firstly though, it does seem to be focused on work, and then on food, because it's about Jesus meeting Peter's needs, helping him with his work and providing rest and food, all as an act of love from Jesus to Peter. So a bad day for Peter turns into a good one. And then it all looked as though it was going to turn bad again for Peter, because Jesus asked him one of those awkward questions. You know the kind, you go to the doctor for a checkup and he or she asks you how many units of alcohol you drink a week and how many portions of fruit and veg you eat each day. And you know what the answers should be, and you also know what the answers really are. And Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? Now, the reason this was an awkward question for Peter was not because the should-be answer and the real answer were different. Both answers were yes. The reason it was awkward was that it touched a raw nerve with Peter. Only a week or two earlier, he'd been asked 3 times if he knew Jesus. And 3 times he'd denied this. Not exactly an act of love to say he wasn't a friend of Jesus. And to mirror this, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? And this would have brought back to Peter even more clearly the memories of his failure. Jesus could have given Peter a lecture on how he should have behaved, on what it means to love your friends. But he didn't. He didn't punish him or tell him off. And so this bad day for Peter got better again. And every time Jesus asked him if he loved him, Peter answered, Master, you know I love you. And he was right. Jesus did know, but he wanted Peter to say it out loud. Jesus died on the cross so that people could be forgiven, and he put this into practice by forgiving Peter for his denials. But he also gave him a job to do. He told him to feed his sheep and his lambs. Not literally sheep and lambs, but people like you and me. And not with bread and fish, but with spiritual food and with love. And Jesus used the events of that morning to remind Peter of why he, Jesus, had come to earth. Things that he would need to know and keep in mind as he and the other followers of Jesus began to build his church here on earth. Now, we sometimes have bad days. We have bad days at work, we have bad days at home. But as with Peter, they're never so bad that we can't involve Jesus in them, because he wants to help us and he wants to love us. Submitting the work of our hands to God can lead to him doing, as Paul says in his letter to the Ephesians, immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. As well as helping us and loving us, Jesus also wants to forgive us for the times when we let him down. But in order for him to do that, we need to acknowledge the things that we've done wrong. So, In the end, the passage isn't really about food or really about work. It's about the love and the forgiveness that Jesus can give. The love and forgiveness that he can give to you. And it's about how Jesus can take the fruit of our work as he took those fish and he can use it. And we can gather around the breakfast campfire with Jesus and we can enjoy the harvest of his grace in our work. Amen.